few more minutes for questions, if we have any. Hi.
I have a question, I guess, for everyone there. So if you have the development in your syllabus and you're trying to find whether it's primary or what have you, and you can't find it necessarily at your library, even if it's not available, your library isn't going to have that, but you know that there's a book that you want, how influential is your voice for your librarian to acquire certain, whether it's subscriptions or book itself?
Well, I guess it can depend on the library's budget, and we could depend on the library's budget, and we can always make requests. Whether they were fulfilled or not, I'm not sure.
Just you guys. And I'll say, from the range of schools that I've talked to, I think faculty input is really important, and some of what librarians are trying to do is to figure out, well, how much is it worth if it's going to be one researcher using it versus, if I'm going to be putting this into syllabus, it's much more important to have a subscription that might be able to cover that kind of stuff. So these are all the kinds of thoughts that I've heard around as well. So understanding where it's being used is really important.
Actually, for you too, because you both seem very wedded to certain texts that you use. You have Nash, you have the invertebrate book. It's kind of like your own book for the course. And I was just curious what the impact is when a new edition comes out to you. But do you really try to find out what's new, or do you just kind of figure it out as you go along in the semester and go, oh,
I pretty much always go to the new edition.
Yeah, you do. Okay. And do you just kind of go along with it, like no worry, that you're going to use it no matter
Mostly
what?
because I want it to be easy for the students to get it. And usually I give my students the option of doing the online. They can do the online version, they can do the paper version. Students occasionally will come with older versions, and we make do with that too.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I always assign the most recent edition, but for the same thing with the student. Once there's a new edition, you can get the previous edition much cheaper. So students will come to me and say, can I use this edition? And I do actually. I always preview. Even though I've used that text for a long time, I always preview each chapter, before classes. So I look to see, well, how much has actually changed. But that's one of the things, for example, teaching at AIC, and I was trying to convey sort of, with respect, depends what institution you're at, and, how would you describe the student body? And money is a big issue for all US undergraduates, given the cost of tuition. And then the cost of books, it's a huge issue. So they will tend to say, well, can I use the 6th, 5th, 4th edition, rather than the 7th or 8th? Mm-hmm. And of course, I think there are laws, aren't they, about how you define a new edition and how much has to change?
I always make sure that we have one on reserve in the library, and enough copies on reserve depending on the size of my class. I'll make sure that I get 2 copies over there if I've got 100 kids. I'll make, 1 if it's a smaller class. Actually, our library has had some challenges with the new digital book. Yeah. Actually, our biology librarian bought her own copy. Has her own copy of it, and we're still trying to work through. We've had a lot of talks with the folks over at Nature Education to try and figure out how the library can get a copy, and I don't think we have a solution yet.
Yeah, I always try to put as many copies of.
I think for some of it, it was I printed out the chapters and put them on reserve in the library to make sure that there was that hard copy if students really needed that.
Question in the back.
Hi, I just wondered if there's anything that publishers can do to support you in your discovery of secondary sources, primary sources, either in terms of kind of making stuff more visible to you guys, perhaps key points of the academic year, or in the classification of our articles or the way that we kind of present things to you. Do you think?
Well, I think it's always good to know, sort of the annual catalogues that come out. I always do have a look to see what different publishers are offering. That can now be delivered digitally rather than sending a paper catalogue. Yeah, it's good for publishers to promote what, promote what they're publishing. So, I don't know if that really answers your question. But
What's the most effective way that kind of works for you? Like using good publishers to promote, or is that kind of...
Well, either email probably now, rather than a paper catalogue. Sure. But by email, yes. Whether it's new editions of a textbook, a new textbook, a new book of documents. And as well, although I seemed a little bit skeptical about the scholarly presses, publishers, it's good to get those catalogues, because in actual fact I mentioned the autobiography of Howard Stretch Johnson, published by Fordham University Press. That I think that they announced that they were going to publish that during the year, and teaching 4-4, you're real busy. Those sorts of things recede from you, and I got a catalogue at the end of the year, happened to sit down, cup of coffee, grades are in, paging through the catalogue, and I was delighted to see it's being published. And actually ponied up and bought a hardback copy myself. If you've seen the documentary Seeing Reds, you'd understand he's an extremely important African-American communist, and an extremely charismatic individual. So, so both old and new methods again. Yeah.
And I'll just put a pitch in for conversations with publishers reps. I find having them as a way to vet potential text and send me potential text to them. I mean, face-to-face conversation, so that the old school method I find still quite effective.
Very good. Another question in the back?
Yeah, I'm a librarian, reserve librarian, and I also teach. And so, as a librarian, who buys a lot of textbooks that are ultimately almost disposable resources, I'm definitely a proponent of open education resources and online textbooks, which I think are gaining traction. But as a teacher who has used a lot of digital course materials in the classroom, I also find that it's often impossible to be on the same page. And I wonder how much of it, all of you talk about cost as being an impact of a factor impacting what text you choose. How much is the format of the resource a factor, and how much does that affect your teaching, or what have you observed in terms of student engagement with text, depending on whether you're using a digital resource or a traditional print? And I'm especially interested in this context since we have science, social science, and humanities in one room.
I haven't noticed any decrease in their engagement. I'm sorry. I haven't noticed any particular, lack of engagement with the textbook and the switch from the paper to the hard copy. Again, it's that some of them love it, some of them hate it. We make it available to them. We can't make them read it. It comes out in their grades if they don't. I try to do a combination of, what's going on in lecture versus, what they're reading in the text, and make sure that, my assignments are relevant to, the content of the exams and all of that. So, I may think it's always a balance.
Yeah. I think whether it's print or digital, the fact that if the students could all, maybe we could give them the option. You can use a print textbook or digital, you've got a device to read it on. But literally it is important, especially in a discussion of it could be a scholarly article in terms of science, or Frederick Douglass's narrative, that when it gets to the famous fight with Covey, we're all on the same page, and students haven't got multiple editions from copies of the narrative from different publishers, and they're struggling to find the page. It's 51 in one edition, and one from one publisher, and 62 on another, and they're going back and forth like this. It literally is a great help for everyone to be literally on the same page, print or digital.
So I think I'm moving slowly, in a couple of ways. The ironic thing to me is, in teaching writing courses, increasingly I'm having my students compose in digital spaces in multimodal ways, but I'm probably slowly moving towards having them read texts that are multimodal and digitally composed. I'm having them making PDFs available, but it's essentially a print resource that they're probably printing out anyway, or text-based resources. So I think I haven't been crazy in the freshman composition kinds of texts about what's been available that's truly multimodal so far, though I'm much more likely to have my students read professional literature in online journals like Kairos and spaces like that.
Okay. Another question right here. Last one.
I have two.
You got to choose one.
The hard one. This one is for Neil. For upper level courses, you mentioned the problem with academics writing for academics. What is your threshold for assigning text that is heavily academic, jargony, and so forth.
Yeah. And I don't know if I had a threshold, but just I know that students are going to need a lot more support, a lot more scaffolding. And I'm doing it with first-year students. I taught first-year writing in the fall, in which they were really reading professional research about writing studies, written for professional researchers in writing studies. And I learned that they struggled with those texts, my students. I needed more support. There was talk of annotating texts and doing that sort of work. I'm having my students engage with text by using a tool like a shared space where they put up a PDF and can each comment on it. I use free resources, actually, even though there's paid ones, you could do that. So that they're engaging with each other and with me to try to understand what the text is doing. So I don't think I have a threshold. In other words, I will use what are difficult texts, but I just know I need to support my students learning and engaging with those texts that much more.
Yeah, I think you definitely have to show them this is a this is a historical document, this is a scholarly article, and really guide them through a scholarly article. I sometimes pick one article and have all the students read that one article, and then we go through it and sort of show them exactly how to read an article, a scholarly article. Things we take for granted. Do you remember the old, what was it, freestyle back in the 1980s? And they used to have that reveal codes, and you could see the commands you put in and what had gone wrong. Sort of, we read an article, and we know the structure of an article. We know how to sort of read it. They don't. We need to really teach them that. And sometimes it's hard to find the right article that has a, sort of the structure and the content and that can serve that purpose. More difficult than you think sometimes.
Okay, well, I think we've run out of time. Big round of applause for our distinguished panelists.